Hello and welcome to Helicopter Training Videos. In this video we're going to talk about the updates to the passenger currency requirements that are coming out in December of 2024. These are new regulations. In the previous video, which went out in September, I went through how the FAA had rescinded some letters of interpretation that had changed the need for instructors and students to be passenger carrying current for training flights. Well, effective December 2nd, 2024, the FAA has brought in some new regulations that once again change things regarding passenger currency requirements for instructors and students. And I'd like to thank Sarah Diener of AOPA who first pointed me to this new rule that's coming out. The new final rule that's coming out has lots of regulatory changes in it. You can see a full list here. The two pieces that we're interested in this video today is the exceptions to recent flight experience for pilot in command and new definition of passenger and the related changes. This is all really around 6157, which is that passenger currency regulation. So first, some history. A quick recap if you didn't watch the other video. In 2006, 2007, and 2014, the FAA issued some letters of interpretation stating that a pilot in training could fly with an instructor without either pilot meeting the passenger carrying currency requirements of 6157. And then in July of 2023, the FAA rescinded those letters, concluding that the legal interpretation was based on unsupported conclusion that a flight instructor and a person receiving flight training are not considered passengers to one another. And then in August of 2024, the FAA published memos to the letter interpretation database for each of the rescinded LOIs. Once they put the memos at the start of each of those letter interpretations, that's when pilots and myself really noticed that there was the change going on there. Meanwhile, the FAA is working on a new rule, and they're getting input from AOPA and HAI and EAA, and those changes to the regulations will codify some of the situations that were covered in the original LOIs. One of the first big changes to these regulations is this passenger definition in 61.1. Passenger means any person on board an aircraft other than a crew member, FAA personnel, manufacturer personnel required for type certification, or a person receiving or providing flight training, checking, or testing as an authorized by this part. So it's saying that if you're an instructor or a student involved in flight training, then you are not considered a passenger. Now, if it had just stopped there, we would have had an easy change that would have simply said, okay, you guys aren't passengers, therefore you aren't required to be passenger current. But that's not all they did. The old 6157 passenger currency requirement said no person may act as a pilot in command of an aircraft carrying passengers, etc., unless you'd had so many takeoff landings. They changed 6157. So now it says no person may act as a pilot in command of an aircraft carrying persons. So it's not using that passenger definition, any person. But they also added a new exception, and that is the bit that allows us to do some flight training without passenger currency concerns, but is very limited. So it says that the paragraphs of A and B of this section, which is day and night currency, do not apply to a person receiving flight training from an authorized instructor, provided three things. First of all, the flight training is limited to the purpose of meeting the requirements of paragraph A and B of the section. So the flight is to go out and get that person receiving training's currency up. Second of all, notwithstanding the provisions of paragraphs A and B of this section, the person receiving flight training meets all other requirements to act as pilot in command. So they have to be able to act as pilot in command in that aircraft, except for the passenger requirements, or the person's carrying requirements now, I guess. So a brand new student who is not yet a rated pilot cannot act as pilot in command, or wouldn't meet this requirement here. Or someone who's an add-on student who's getting a new category class and hasn't been qualified to do that yet. Or same with endorsements, like an endorsement for the R22 PIC. If they don't have that yet, then they are not meeting all other requirements to act as a pilot in command. And then the last piece is the authorized instructor and the person receiving flight training are the sole occupants of the aircraft. Well, that might seem obvious, but there had been questions that came up in the previous LOIs or letter interpretations about what if there's another student in the back seat who's actively receiving instruction through listening and watching, even though they're not on the flight controls. And so that kind of clears that up too. So though this new exception does allow for some situations, it's not quite the same as it was back when the letters of interpretation were still valid. So the new exception will allow a pilot in training who is rated in the aircraft, and that's the important piece, but is not person carrying current to fly with an instructor to get current, even if the instructor is also not current. However, if the pilot in training is not otherwise qualified to act as PIC in the aircraft, then the instructor must be person carrying current. The FAA kind of breaks it down like this. They make this distinction between these two situations. This is some verbiage from the final rule. Although this final rule is enabling a situation where a flight instructor may be on board an aircraft with another pilot, neither of whom has met the recent flight experience requirements, the risk is mitigated by the fact that both persons are otherwise qualified to operate the aircraft. If the same flight instructor were to act as PIC of an aircraft carrying a flight student who is not an otherwise qualified pilot, the risk is increased because in the event of an emergency, only one person is capable of operating the aircraft rather than two, and the sole person capable of operating does not have the benefit of recent flight experience. In other words, certain proficiencies may have degraded over time due to disuse. So it's still requiring instructors to maintain currency for most situations, right? So it's just a quick reminder here that to log takeoff and landings, for instructors to log takeoff and landings for this currency requirement, they must be the sole manipulator of the flight controls. Sole manipulator of the flight controls. Now, that can be a little bit confusing because instructors can log cross-country and night time and even instrument time if in actual IMC while instructing and not be on the flight controls. But 6157 and Collins 2012 letter of interpretation say the instructor must be the sole manipulator of the flight controls to log takeoff and landings for passenger currency, or what we're now probably calling person currency. So here's some scenarios to consider. I'll give you the answers as we go through this. First of all, these are all these scenarios. It's going to be a night flight, so at least 1 hour past sunset. So a night flight defined for passenger currency or person currency. It's going to be in a Robinson R44. Are you going to be legal in each of these scenarios? So the first scenario, the student is a private pilot helicopter with an SFAR 73 R44 PIC endorsement, but the instructor is not night current in the R44. The flight involves some night takeoff and landings to get the student night person current. Is that legal? Next scenario. Same as scenario 1, but with another student in the back who is actively learning by watching and listening. Scenario number 3. Same as scenario number 1, but the plan is to fly a long night cross-country to relocate the helicopter for a tour the following morning. Scenario number 4. The student is a private pilot helicopter but new to the R44 and does not have an SFAR 73 R44 PIC endorsement. The CFI is not night person carrying current in the R44, and the flight will involve some night takeoff and landings to get the pilot in training night person current. So the answer to these questions, first of all, 1, yes, the student is otherwise qualified to act PIC in the R44, and the purpose of the flight is to get the student night person current. Answer number 2, no other person can be on board per the limitations of that exception. Answer number 3, no, probably. The purpose of the flight must be limited to getting the student person carrying current. Answer number 4, no, the student is not otherwise qualified to act PIC in the R44, and so the instructor would need to be night person current in the R44. And so remember, these scenarios, this is my interpretation of it. This is a regulation. It is a new regulation. So, there may be other interpretations of this. Let us know what you think. So you want more information on this and you're watching on YouTube, you can find these links in the description below. If you want more helicopter training videos, check out our Helicopter Ground School series or the Helicopter Flight Maneuver series. Or perhaps you want to follow along with a student from day one all the way through to their check ride with our full flight lesson series. And if you haven't already, please click subscribe to get all the latest videos and help promote the channel. And finally, for more information on helicopter training videos, including articles, resources, quizzes and more, and learn how to support this volunteer project, check out our website, helicoptertrainingvideos.com. Thanks for watching.